What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for another car review. This is of course the 2019 Hyundai Veloster N. Huge thanks to Hyundai for providing me with this very sweet N to review for you guys today. So about the Veloster N, well, it's just so awesome this car exists. You know, with Ford getting rid of their hot hatches and stuff, the fact that Hyundai has a brand new hot hatch, the highest performing hot hatch they've ever made here for the United States, it's really cool looking. So all the same compliments that I said about the Veloster Turbo in last year's review still apply here to the N. You know, it's still a really good looking vehicle. I love that they kept the funky styling, you know, with having the one door here on the driver's side and two on the passenger side. And up front here, it also looks very attractive. You know, I still like these headlamps. The grille is still very nice, and I like how it's actually a little more subtle than I was expecting, honestly, with the N badge being a reasonable size and not being too showy. I also like the more aggressive front bumper you have here on the ends with that little arrow skirt you have here on the sides of them, although that black portion next to it is blocked off, so that's not totally functional, but at least we do have the functional arrow skirt. They're very cool, and overall I do like the red accents too. I know it's a little bold for some people, and that's a very easy thing to black out if you want to, but I think it actually looks pretty good. Coming down to the sides here, you have these nice large 19-inch wheels on these paper thin tires, but it gives it a very sporty appearance. Also coming down to the sides, you know, you have more of those red accents and a good look overall. I still like the fastback profile here of the Veloster. And then going out back there, you have a lot more aggressiveness here for the N version. So first off, right up top, you will see that large rear spoiler, which has some carbon fiber textured material there on the sides of it, but I don't believe it's an actual carbon fiber unit. But it is a very cool spoiler. I think it's, you know, more subtle than the Civic Type R's, while still, you know, being like, hey, like, notice me, this is a little more aggressive, and kind of separates it from the Turbo in that regard. And I also like the little triangular third brake light you have there integrated into it as well. And overall, I think it's fairly tasteful, again, for the class of vehicle we're in. You also have some nice large exhaust tips there in the bottom, and rear diffuser, which nicely fill out that lower part of the rear bumper there. And so overall, I think it's a very cool look. As for the interior of the Veloster N, well, it's a pretty cool place to be. Not the most luxurious, of course, but still a very nice place to be nonetheless. So anyway, first thing, sitting down in these seats, you have these cloth bucket seats that are N specific and have really beefy side bolsters here that feel really good. You know, I actually thought they'd be a little less comfortable than they are, honestly. They're still nice soft cloth here, and yeah, they just hold you in place really well. I like the, you know, light blue stitching you have here on them, and all the little accents of light blue you have all throughout this interior. You know, it's around the engine start button, over on the left hand side, it's on the steering wheel and everything else, and I really like that. But anyway, so these seats are pretty comfortable. The only thing I will say is that the headrests are about as soft as styrofoam. They're pretty firm, and so yeah, you're not going to want to lean your head there on the headrest at all, but still great seats otherwise. They're not heated or anything either here. Basically, the Veloster N, at least as of right now, it's based on just a base Veloster interior, so that means you don't have any heated seats. You know, you don't have any of the niceties of the higher end Veloster. For the same money, you know, you could go for a Veloster Turbo if you're willing to sacrifice power, and those have, you know, for the same price point, heated and cooled seats. You have a wireless charging pad, you have adaptive cruise control, heads-up display. All those types of things are missing here in the Veloster N. It's a stripped-down model, and you also have plenty of hard plastic, which you get in all Velosters for the most part, but especially here, you know, it just feels a little low rent in here. But I don't think most Veloster N buyers are going to care. I don't think the demographic usually cares in general. And so hard plastics are totally fine, and I think, you know, keeping the price point low was the priority. Next though is the steering wheel here in the Veloster N, which is actually a perfect wheel. It's just a little bit thicker, I think, than a normal Veloster steering wheel, but it has a perfect 9-3 grip, nice 10 and 2 notches, just a few buttons here on it that are all mostly familiar to any other Hyundai steering wheel, but you do have a rev button here, and so that turns on and off the rev matching independent of the drive modes. Now there's a million drive modes, and I'll get to that in a minute, but So great to have just an independent rev matching mode if you want to have it on or off. It's very easy to do. I do believe it defaults as to being off, and then you have to turn it on every time you start it up. Otherwise, you have these nice smooth buttons here that are light blue, very large for drive mode on the left hand side, and that one will control just normal, sport, and eco modes. And then the other drive modes are controlled by here, the flag icon, and so you hit that puts you into N mode. If you hit it again, that puts you into N custom, and then that's where you can customize everything. So while we're talking about that, I mean, there is just so much customization you can do here with that custom mode. You can custom tailor every little aspect of both the powertrain as well as the chassis to have it set up exactly the way you want if the standard modes aren't enough. I mean, you can change the exhaust mode with 3 different levels. Even the rev matching has 3 different levels. You can have it off, you can have normal rev matching, sport rev matching, which I guess is a little quicker to blip, and then N, like, you know, sporty or sport plus rev matching as well. So I mean, I've never seen that much customization on anything. Even a BMW doesn't have that much customization for the M modes and stuff. So that is really sweet to have all this here in the N. Next to the gauges here in the N, which are pretty cool. So you know, you have analog dials still, which is something, you know, you have stuff like the Civic Type R, which has digital gauges, and you know, some others that are a little more advanced than this, but this is on par with, you go with like a GTI or something like that. So you know, totally fine gauges. I do love too, especially the tach. It will have little orange lights before the red line there whenever the engine's cold and the oil temp isn't up to temperature yet, and so that's kind of cool, so you don't hurt the engine too much whenever you're driving when you first start off. And otherwise, there's attractive gauges. I like how all Velosters here have the speedometer where it goes up in increments of 10 until you get to 60, and then it goes up in increments of 20. Kind of a cool touch. On the center there, you have all the basic little you know, things you get on any other Hyundai, you know, for trip information, stuff like that. But you do also have this like N specific menu, and so you'll see that that's very cool. You can have oil temp as displayed, as well as torque and turbo, all there on the same page. And having a boost gauge is great, you know, with the turbo gauge there. And then oil temp is another thing that not enough performance vehicles have an oil temp gauge. That is crucial to making sure everything is up to temperature before you start hammering on it. So great that that has that. I love that. And then you have a lap timer, a G meter as well, which is all appreciated, fun little toys. And you also have a digital speed readout too, which is great if you don't like looking at the analog. And I do believe you also have up in the top there, those shift lights, I think, you know, and I haven't taken this to redline yet. I always wait until my very first on-camera reaction, but I believe when you go to redline, those do light up, so we'll try that out here in a minute. But overall, great gauges. Coming over to the center of the dashboard here, you have Hyundai's basic screen here. I believe it's 7 inches in size, and it looks very good. I just really like how easy to use it is. It has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Unfortunately, you don't have any kind of upgrades available for navigation or anything, but most people just use their phones anyway, so you know, that's great that it has the smartphone integration. It's also, you know, typical Hyundai stuff, as well as tuning radio stations. Thankfully, you do have a volume and a tune knob, which is great. That's not a given in a lot of other vehicles these days, so great to have those. The Civic, for example, just finally saw the light and reintroduced the volume knob. They still don't have a tune knob, so I love that. It's a simple thing, but it's really appreciated. You also do have a few other shortcut buttons there, you know, if you want to jump around for things in the infotainment. And another thing to mention too is, although this isn't like an upgraded vehicle, it's not very high end as far as the trim goes, you do still have Infinity stereo speakers. So I don't think it's as high end as the top Infinity trim you can get in the Veloster turbos, but still is nice to have, you know, so at least the stereo isn't totally low rent like everything else, you know, as far as features go on the N here. But the great thing about this infotainment system is the N settings here you have, and so this N screen you can have displayed all the time if you want, and it has a performance timer, G-force meter, all that stuff is also, you know, displayed. But you also do have the boost gauge here, torque, and also a horsepower gauge, which is something you don't get in the center here. So that's cool to have all those, and that's also a shortcut to get into your customizing of the N mode driving mode. So that's nice to have all that, and very cool to just leave that up. Coming down, you do have standard automatic climate control here in the Veloster N, which is nice. Now it's not dual zone, but at least it's automatic, and so that's appreciated. And then coming down beneath that, you have a USB jack, an auxiliary jack, a charging USB jack, and then also a standard power outlet. So great to have all those hookups there. And then you have this pretty nicely sized cubby here right beneath that, and for some reason this one has duct tape over it. I don't know what happened there, but anyway, a great nicely rubberized area here. And you also do have 2 2 cup holders, and you also have bottle holders in the doors, as well as a pretty large pocket cutout. You also have the center armrest too, coming back over to the center here, that has a little bit of padding to it, but is pretty firm. The door padding is also pretty firm. Like I said, everything's pretty hard in here. I mean, the e-brake cover is just hard plastic. Everything is, just low rent, but that's okay. Like I said, this is about performance, not about having a luxury car. Anyway, you open up the center armrest, and you'll see a nice deep cubby in there as well, and you can fit plenty of things in there. Backseat space in the Veloster is an interesting setup, again, unique to basically the Veloster and no other vehicle in the world. And so that's because, you have the third door arrangement here. So you can only get in, the only third doors on the passenger side there. So backseat space in the Veloster is good though once you're in there. So getting in and out of that backseat, you have 2 options. Both involve a little bit of parkour. So you can either hurdle over the cup holders there in that center part of the seat if you want to get to the driver's side rear seat, or the driver's side rear seat occupant can also sling forward this front seat here and get out like as if it was an actual 2-door vehicle. So those are your 2 options. Neither of them are very easy, so I would suggest you going for a real 4-door if you are going to use the back seat every day. But if you use it every once in a while, or you have very athletic rear occupants that don't mind hurdling every day, then that back seat is great. And it is a good amount of space, I have to say. Despite the hurdles, it is a very roomy back seat, more roomy than you would expect. Because I'm 5'9", me sitting behind myself, I have about 3 inches of legroom to spare, and I actually have some headroom to spare too, which you might be shocked by considering, again, the racier roofline. But I can sit back there all day in complete comfort. So I mean, totally livable, a great back seat here, and so it makes the Veloster, again, more practical than you would expect, I think, looking at it from the outside. And then, it is a little more Spartan back there as far as back seats go, where you only have the 2 cup holders and a little bin there. You don't have any kind of fold-down center armrest, no pockets in the doors or anything like that, no air vents, nothing. But, again, for a back seat for people to sit in every once in a while, totally sufficient and really nice to have. Cargo space in the Veloster is also probably better than you would expect. So there's a little bit of a lip to reach over there, but once you're in there, it's a nice wide and a very deep space, and a nicely sized space. You can still fit a couple suitcases in there with ease. And then beneath the floor, you'll see a couple little cutouts there, little bins you can store some shallow things in if you would like. And so you don't have any kind of spare tire or anything, but you do have a tire pump, and that's about it. But I think having not having a spare tire does give you that extra depth there for the cargo area, which I think is mostly appreciated. And so overall, a good amount of cargo space here in the Veloster too. Alright, so sorry, I'm going for a drive. The Veloster N here has a very cool Hyundai key with the N badging, which is a nice touch, honestly. And it's a pretty high quality key. It has a really nice weight to it. Pretty small, pretty thin, not as bulky as a lot of newer keys, which I really appreciate that this is nice and small. Some nice glossy piano black buttons there on the back. And overall, just a really nice key. A little bit of metal accents on it too. But of course, the keyless access, keyless entry, and push button starts. You just leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. And another thing I have to add while I'm getting ready to take off here is you have blue seat belts here in the Veloster N. So that's obviously part of the whole N packaging, and that's the theme here with this color throughout this interior. And it matches perfectly with the exterior of this one, but with other colors it might stand out and be a little odd, but I actually think this is really cool. Alright, so setting off in the 2019 Hyundai Veloster N. So, first thing you notice, well, like any other Veloster, you have a nice low seating position, but you still have pretty good visibility. You have a fairly thin A-pillar, although you do have this little triangle that kind of blocks a little bit, but it's very, very minor. But otherwise, you just have nice large windows here, especially on the driver's side here, and a good view out of the back, although not as good as most hatchbacks, but it's totally usable. The only thing is you do have a pretty thick C-pillar over your right shoulder there. Now, I haven't had it give me any issues so far. It hasn't been annoying yet. Otherwise, though, just setting off here, it's a pretty smooth ride in normal mode. The exhaust is also a little bit of a burble, especially when you're slowing down, but it is pretty mild. But thankfully, like I said, it's an active exhaust that actually does open up some valves and make it louder whenever you want. But in normal mode, it's nicely subtle so that you're not, turning every head as you drive by. And it's a nice thing to just cruise in normal mode. You have a little bit more of a delayed throttle response in normal mode, but it's still pretty precise. The clutch pedal is a very short take-up, so you move it a little bit and you immediately start getting grabbing action. So it's a very delicate clutch you have to learn and get used to. But otherwise, it's a pretty easy vehicle to drive. You know, the shifter is also very precise, although it's not the notchiest feeling. You know, I think the Civic Type R has a better feeling shifter, but so far it's still very easy to use and very precise. But let's go ahead and put it up into the N mode, and let's turn down onto this back road here and see how it does. Here we go. Little crackles and pops. It's like a firing squad. Oh man, and it's different every time, so it's not super engineered in there, although it certainly is, but it's a little more natural sounding than some of the others, like the Supra, where it sounds exactly the same every time. But man, and then as I lean on these brakes, they really clamp down hard. Very, very responsive brakes, which is appreciated. But anyway, the Veloster N here runs a 2-liter turbo engine, and so thankfully it does, in standard form, 250 horsepower, 260 pound-feet of torque, but this one has the performance package, which gives you an extra 25 horsepower for a grand total of 275 horsepower, and that allows us to do 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds, which is pretty quick, and it felt about that quick. I really, you know, might even be a little bit quicker. We'll have to do another acceleration to test that some more. But it sounds really good here in the N mode too. I just love that exhaust. And it's interesting because sport mode doesn't have as many crackles. Like that, it's like sport mode's louder, but you don't get as much crazy crackles, and this gives you all the crazy crackles, and that's pretty cool. But we'll do another little acceleration here. I'm impressed. I got into the gas whenever the wheel was turned, and I thought it was going to give me some wheel spin, and it didn't. So one of the other benefits here of the performance package is that you get an electronic limited slip differential as well as a slightly shorter final drive ratio. So that should help keep everything planned pretty well. We're also running some slightly wider tires here with the performance package. They're 235 wide Pirelli P0s. Usually you get 225s on a standard Veloster N, and so that again gives you, you know, a good amount of improvement there, which is great. But we're coming up to some corners here, and we're in ESC Sport mode. It allows a little more oversteer, they say, in N mode. So we'll see how it does here. Wow, it really turns in well. I steered a little bit more and didn't need to give as much steering input as I needed to, because it was just like wanting to dive in. It's really, wow, this thing is so fine-tuned in the way that it's set up. These brakes are so precise, it's so grabby, and the G-forces of this thing, it's just throwing around my camera gear back there. But wow, this thing loves corners. I think it also helps that we have these, you know, like I said, tiny sidewalls on these tires, which isn't great for potholes if you are opposed to getting flat tires, but for performance and handling, I mean, these things are amazing. It's just really, really lively handling. Steering has a really nice weight and feel to it too. Oh, it just is so easy to be so precise with this thing. But this would be an amazing autocross car. Yeah, I'm really impressed though with how this thing is so buttoned down, and it is very light and flat feeling, partially because of its pretty low weight. So these only weigh 3,077 pounds for its curb weight, and so that's, you know, a little bit less weight than a lot of the competitors, which are bigger, heavier. And this is a little bit smaller, so it has the advantage of almost having the weight of like a 2-door hatchback, which is almost unheard of here in America anymore. Everything's 4 doors these days, and so I think the slightly smaller footprint of this really helps. For example, this is almost a foot shorter than a Civic Type R. Obviously, it's less practical than a Civic Type R too, but you know, so that's the kind of advantage you get with that, is you have one less foot of car, and so that means you have less weight. It's going to feel more compact, more alive, and you can definitely feel that shorter wheelbase here over what you get with the Civic Type R. And overall, it is really fun. It's one of those cars that you just want to keep driving more. You want to keep pushing it. You want to find another corner. You want to get up early on a Saturday morning and just, you know, go drive it hard. That's the type of feeling I'm getting here with this. All right, so this time the tires are actually wet, and now let's see. Yeah, now we're getting the wheel spin. All right, but it does such a good job. It's really doing a great job of controlling this wheel spin up front. You know, it's a lot of power to put through the front wheels, and like Civic Type R has a fancier front suspension setup to kind of disconnect the torque steer from, you know, the suspension geometry. This doesn't have any of that, I don't think, but it does a really good job. I guess it's that E-diff that's just really helping this to put down the power very well. And I'm sure, again, you provoke it, you do a 90-degree corner and floor it, you're going to get some wheel spin, but it does a really good job of keeping it under control. Now, again, we are in ESC Sport mode. If I were to put it and, turn everything off or something, then you could get, a lot of those antics, and this thing would gladly do a burnout for you. Another thing here in the sportier modes is you have heavier steering, and it feels fine in normal mode, but the sport mode just gives it a nice little bit of extra heft without being overkill. I really like that. If a rev matching, it does very well too. It's perfect rev matching here in the full-on N mode, but throughout the week I'll be testing out the other modes of the rev matching to see what the difference is, but it's just does such a good job. Oh yeah, it's like a little go-kart. So far I am super impressed here with the Veloster N. Comparing it to some of its main competitors, just as far as driving dynamics, very briefly, I will say that this feels lighter than both the GTI and the Civic Type R, and the Civic Si for that matter too. It feels lighter than all those, hands down, very easily. And I will say that this feels a little more tossable than the Type R. The Type R has, I think, higher limits. I would have more confidence pushing a Type R at 100 miles an hour than I would with this, probably. But I think that on a back road corner, it's just, this has a little bit more of a lighter feeling to it, and so that gives me actually more confidence in tight corners that I can just chuck it in and have a little less apprehension than I would with some of those heavier competitors. But I'm going to have this car for an entire week thanks to Hyundai, so I'm going to drive around all week, get some more developed impressions here, and then I'll come back and give you guys my updated real-world fuel economy, as well as my thoughts on the pricing and my thoughts on its competitors. And just for kicks, here's how the exhaust sounds with the windows down. Listen to that, that's so great. Oh, that exhaust is hilarious. I love this thing. It sounds really good for a 4-cylinder too. Like, just independent of the exhaust, it's just a really sweet sound of the 4-cylinder. Oh man, this thing makes me want to misbehave so badly. Alright, so I've been driving the Veloster N here for a week now, and I've put 110 miles on it. Not a ton of driving, but a good bit, and it's been all mostly spirited driving. I did a little bit of daily driving stuff in it as well. Did a little bit of a highway run, things like that. But this thing is so much fun. It is a blast. I think the exhaust alone makes this car worth getting, just because it sounds like an actual rally car. A couple other interesting observations though. Speaking of the modes, I did notice that the full-on N mode was a little bouncy for the suspension, at least for roads around here, and so I found doing the custom mode and having everything else in N except for the suspension, having that in Sport instead of Sport Plus, made the suspension a lot more compliant, so that over bumps and undulations it wasn't quite as bouncy as it was in the Sport Plus mode there. But that's great that you have that customization. This is why that kind of customization is nice, because you can custom tailor it for the type of roads you have in your area and stuff, and this thing just handles so phenomenally well. I absolutely love this thing, and also it seems that everyone else loves it, aside from one person who didn't like the color. Like, everyone comments on this vehicle. Every time I go through a drive-through, everyone's checking it out. People are commenting. I was in Sonic last night going through the drive-through, and the person there was like, wow, this looks really cool. Like, I'm really impressed. This is a Hyundai. Like, they're like all into it and stuff, and it was like not a car person, just like random people. This car elicits responses from them, and I don't know if it's the combination of the red accents you have that set this off as being something special, or the spoiler, or what, but it's really a car that gets attention, and I wasn't honestly expecting that. It's less showy than something like the Civic Type R and stuff like that, but this thing gets attention still, which is just an interesting I guess side effect of all the performance stuff it has. And so yeah, I really love this package, and my only thing is I really wish that this package was available on other Hyundais. Now, we know other N models are coming, but as of right now, this is the only one, and I really hope they do the Elantra GT with an N version, because that's actually the first N that arrived in Europe, was the i30N. The i30 here in the States we call the Elantra GT for some reason, and so that, would be awesome if we got that same treatment for the Elantra GT. There is the N line currently, but not the full-on N, and I think that would allow the N to have, very similar fun, but also have the better hatchback practicality of having having 4 real doors, a little bit more backseat space and stuff like that, and I think that would be, you know, really helpful. And so that's the only thing I can say. The only other thing is the fuel economy hasn't been great here. So obviously I've been driving very enthusiastically, so that's probably to be expected as well. But these are rated 22 in this city, 25 combined, and then 28 on the highway. And in my driving 112 miles, almost 113 miles now, I got 20.2, so about 2 mpg less than what I should be getting. But again, I've been getting on it, so I can't really fault it. So one thing a lot of people were asking was for me to compare this to a lot of the other sporty stuff in this segment. And so the main thing, you know, I guess you could compare this most closely in price to a Volkswagen GTI Rabbit Edition. Those also have cloth seats, but they are heated seats. The interior is a little bit nicer. You don't have as much horsepower though, even though torque is very similar. The horsepower is about 50 less in the GTI. And so I think that comes down to, one, if you want an automatic option, because it's manual only here for the Veloster N, at least for now. So, you know, if you want an automatic, the Volkswagen is one of the best, by the way, and it's also, you know, actually available. So that might be a deciding factor there. Also, you know, the interior is nicer, so if you value a nicer interior and a slightly softer ride, I think that you'll appreciate the GTI is a little bit more on the accessible, easier to live with side. Not that this is hard to live with, quite the opposite. It's very much fun to live with, but you know, just it would be a little bit more polish, I think, in the Volkswagen. Another main competitor is the Civic Type R. It's also about $5,000 more expensive than this, so maybe not a totally fair comparison, but because, you know, you do get the extra power, it means it's a little bit quicker. It's also a larger vehicle though, so it means that has good and bad. So, you know, it feels a little bit weightier, a little bit larger, whereas this, I love the compact nature of this. I think it's a lot of fun to kind of chuck into corners, and it's a little, even just in like tight spaces and stuff, this feels more like a Mini or something than it does a hatchback, you know, a big, you know, 4-door hatchback, because it's, you know, a little bit smaller dimensions. And so I actually like the size of this better than the Civic Type R, which can feel a tiny bit big at times, although it's not a big vehicle. But when you're comparing and you're splitting hairs here, that's just a difference that I've noticed. The things that the Civic Type R has going for it are that, of course, you have more space, more hatch space, more rear leg room, all that type of stuff. You also have way more storage space in the cabin here, and you also have a slightly nicer cabin as well. Now, their infotainment system, I actually prefer the Hyundai system here compared to the old infotainment system that Honda runs in the Civic still. You know, but otherwise, I think the Civic is nice. It's also, you know, a little bit sportier on the inside. The seats are more aggressive and stuff, and so that might make it a little bit harder to live with, I think, than this. But one thing that is undeniable is the shifter in the Civic Type R is fantastic, and one of the best shifters period out there as far as current manuals go. And this one is okay, but it's not great, and so I think the Civic Type R definitely has the advantage there with that. But yeah, so those are kind of the differences there. And the last vehicle to compare this to, actually, to me, the closest and toughest cross-shopped competitor is actually other Velosters, or the Elantra GT Turbo, if you want to even look at those, but especially just normal Velosters, because yes, you have 75 more horsepower than you get in a, you know, normal Veloster Turbo. But there's a couple things. So, you know, this is basically the same equipment you get in a Veloster Turbo R-Spec. And so with the R-Spec, it actually has a few nicer additions that you don't get here in the N. For example, you have a B&M shifter that actually feels better than the shifter in this. And I thought that was interesting that the N didn't get the better shifter. This has this plasticky shift knob that actually doesn't feel good, to be perfectly honest. And the shifter in the R-Spec version of the Turbo Veloster feels way better and is a really nice feeling shifter. Also, for the linkage and everything, is a little bit weightier and feels a lot nicer than the one here in the N. So that's something I think that is actually an improvement in the Turbo. And also the Turbo R-Spec and other turbos with the manual also get Michelin's Pilot Sport 4S tires. Here we're running sporty Pirellis, which are fine, but I think the Michelins actually have a little bit of an edge as far as dry grip and wet performance for summer tires. And that's, I mean, they're often, you know, praised as being one of the best summer tires, and I kind of agree with that line of thinking. So I think you do get actually better tires on the Veloster Turbo R spec, and you get a better shifter in that than you do here in this. And add to that the fact the Veloster Turbo in its R spec is $6,000 less. And when you're talking about the $20,000 to $30,000 price category, $6,000's a pretty big jump. Now, obviously, again, this exhaust, the drive modes, the extra power, all those things might be worth $6,000. And, you know, I would rather spend $6,000 getting this than spend $6,000 in the aftermarket on a turbo and doing other things like that, because I love how the exhaust dual mode and it's all tied to the electronics. So, you know, you can throw an exhaust on a Veloster Turbo and maybe it'll sound pretty similar, but it'll be constantly booming. Whereas with this, I can put it into normal mode and immediately quiets down if I don't feel like having a blaring exhaust every day of my life. So there's that kind of stuff. But still, I mean, you know, the Veloster Turbo R spec to me is 75 to 80% of the experience you get in the N. It's not a massive, wild difference. You know, I think it depends obviously on your budget and stuff, but I think I would be very happy still with the Turbo R spec. I really enjoyed my week with that I had not too long ago. And you know, the N is fantastic. I would probably, yes, pay the extra money for the N, but I honestly wish there was just a nicer trim for the N, because the cloth seats are okay, but they don't feel, you know, they're not super high quality. I like a little bit of a more luxurious interior. I'm probably more towards the GTI buyer spectrum, but, you know, I think if there was like an ultimate package for the Veloster N, or an N tech package that upgraded stuff to give you some of those niceties, then, you know, that would totally be worth 33, 34 grand or something to me. But as this is, I think it's still very good. And I think they know that enthusiasts, most of you out there, you don't care about how the plastics feel on the inside. You just want the performance, and that's the main thing. And I think the Veloster N kind of, they targeted that especially. There might be additional, you know, trims and stuff down the road, who knows. But for now, I think this is an excellent, excellent package. It's just fantastic. I love, love, love this car. And yeah, I think they priced it right, everything they did, and they knocked it out of the park. So hopefully this N powertrain just goes across the rest of the lineup. It'd be great to see this be thrown in the normal Elantra, although they did discontinue the manual for the Elantra. It'd be great to see that get this powertrain, as well as, you know, everything else. There's talks of a Tucson N, which might be a little bit more weird, but even that might be cool, who knows. But yeah, overall, I absolutely love it. And so anyway, let me know your thoughts on the Veloster N in the comments below. Huge thanks to Hyundai for providing me with this Veloster N to review for you guys today. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.